this week play host to the 56th session of the Asian African Legal Consultative Organization Conference that will be chaired by Kenya's Attorney General, Professor Githu Muigai. The forum brings together 47 member countries to seek cooperation on matters of international law. I sat down with the Attorney General this afternoon and asked him why this is important and some of the key areas of discussion. Tell us about this conference and why it's important.
This conference is very important for Kenya. This is going to be the third time that Kenya is hosting this organization that dates back to the 1950s. It brings together our countries in Africa, in Asia, and in the Middle East around the issues of international law and diplomacy. It has been historically a forum in which we have debated issues of common interest to us as Africans, Asians, and our colleagues that may not necessarily be viewed in the same way by developed countries, for example. I can give you one example, which is the law of the sea, whose treaty was concluded in 1980. ALCO was a very, very key body in formulating the perspective of Africa and Asia on this very important treaty. Indeed, Kenya was probably the leading exponent of a concept we now call the exclusive economic zone that allows a country that neighbors the sea to have an exclusive economic zone that cannot be interfered by any other countries. ALCO was able to channel and mainstream these concerns of developing countries, and they found their way finally in the law of the sea. There are so many other areas we are concerned about. We are concerned about the use of outer space. You see, the less technologically advantaged a country is, then the less resources you have for that kind of activity.
Right.
And we in ALCO have been working for several years now to ensure that outer space is utilized for the common benefit of mankind, and so on.
Okay, so there's a number of issues, I think, that Kenya remains at the center of. There's the war on terror, there's the trade in ivory. So let's start by talking about some of these individually, including even cybercrime, that is, something that is emerging,
big problem.
In developing countries. So let's start by talking, about the big one, which is, the war on terror. What have been some of the challenges in terms of, legal, when you talk about, dealing from one state to another, that you have faced, that this conference perhaps will start to talk about and begin to resolve?
Well, first of all, what the war on terror did was to expose the inadequacy in the legal regimes that all countries, not only Kenya, all countries, including the United States and the superpowers, were using at the time. Because not only didn't we have the legal resources to gather intelligence, to process intelligence, to distribute intelligence, we also didn't have the capacity to process suspects. After investigation, how do we prosecute them? How do we incarcerate them? In fact, as you may know, one of the side problems of terror from a legal perspective is that when you have even successfully prosecuted the perpetrators, they create a new problem in jail, which is radicalizing the average population in prisons, and so on. So we've had to go back to the drawing board and look at the entire chain, and ask ourselves, how do we strengthen the state better to intercept and destroy terror, units, and how do we prosecute where we can, and how do the courts handle very classified information, and how do we deal with the convicts when that has happened? And a consensus is beginning to emerge, because the truth is, the fact that you are fighting terror doesn't mean that you unleash terror on the civilian population. So you need to have a framework that fights terror, recognizing that your population and other populations are in a free country and free society. So you cannot tap into their communication without due procedures provided for by the law. And these are the sort of things we've been learning from each other, exchanging from each other. And I can tell you, since 9/11 to date, the legal infrastructure has changed so radically and continues to change that this sort of meeting continues to be very critical for that.
Terrorism is a global problem. You have persons moving from one country to another to essentially commit terror acts in that country. So even having, a synergy of the laws, there's been the big one, I think, in Kenya as well about rendition of suspects from, one country to another. So how do you work in such a way that, all these countries are sovereign states, but in terms of synergizing what their laws do, because, terror is a shared problem, even as countries are sovereign?
Indeed, I think you've hit the nail on the head. If there is one aspect of international criminal law that has demonstrated the need for states to work together, it's the war on terror. Because there are no borders. The terrorists who are operating in Syria, who are operating in other countries, are able to arrive in Nairobi within a 12-hour cycle. And so that the global alert, whether it's in Egypt or it's in Turkey or it's in Iran, it has to be a coordinated effort. And what countries are increasingly doing is sharing intelligence and sharing real-time intelligence so that we can disrupt these networks.